The inheritance. James had never expected this. A letter, addressed to him in a neat, elegant handwriting, sat on his kitchen counter. It had arrived early in the morning, just as he was sipping his coffee. The letter's seal was strange, an old emblem that he didn't recognize. It felt out of place among the modern world he lived in, and that alone made his curiosity spark. He opened it, not knowing that this single piece of paper would change his life forever. The letter, in a formal tone, informed James that he had inherited a mansion from a relative he had never heard of, an uncle named Arthur Wainwright. The letter went on to explain that Arthur had passed away recently, leaving behind a large estate in the form of a mansion, located deep in the countryside. James, being the only living relative, was now the sole heir. A mansion. He could hardly believe it. James had no memory of ever meeting this uncle, nor had he ever heard his name mentioned by his parents. They had always kept to themselves, and James had lived a quiet, somewhat lonely life, working as a mechanic in the city. It seemed impossible that someone he didn't even know had left him something so valuable. But curiosity won over doubt. He decided he would visit the mansion. What harm could it do? He packed a small bag, grabbed his car keys, and headed toward the address listed in the letter. The drive was longer than expected. The further he went, the more the landscape seemed to change, the city slowly disappearing behind him. Tall trees surrounded the narrow road, and the air grew quieter. The mansion, according to the letter, was secluded, hidden away in the hills. It was like stepping back in time. Finally, after what felt like hours, James arrived. The mansion loomed ahead, massive, ancient, and eerily beautiful. It looked like something out of a forgotten storybook, with towering stone walls and windows covered by thick vines. The front yard, once carefully manicured, was now overgrown, with wild grass and flowers growing in strange patterns. James stood in front of the grand iron gates, staring at the dark, looming structure. It seemed alive, breathing with its own history, its own secrets. He hesitated, a strange feeling stirring in his chest. His instincts told him to turn back, but the promise of something extraordinary held him in place. After a deep breath, he pushed open the gates and walked up the long, cracked pathway leading to the front door. The door opened with a loud creak as he pushed it. The smell of dust and age hit him immediately. Inside, the mansion was vast, with high ceilings and grand chandeliers that hadn't been cleaned in years. The floors were covered in a thick layer of dust, and everything seemed untouched, as if frozen in time. James couldn't help but feel a mix of awe and unease. The place was beautiful, but there was something wrong about it, something unsettling. The walls were lined with portraits of people he didn't recognize, their eyes seemingly watching his every move. He moved cautiously through the house, exploring each room one by one. The old furniture was covered in sheets, the windows barely letting in any light. It felt like the mansion had been abandoned for a long time, yet everything seemed strangely well preserved. As James moved deeper into the house, he felt an inexplicable pull, as if something was calling to him. It was strongest as he reached the second floor. The hallway was narrow, and the air was colder here. At the end of the hall was a large door, slightly ajar, leading into what appeared to be the master bedroom. James pushed the door open, and his heart nearly stopped. There, lying in the middle of the king-sized bed, was a woman. She was beautiful, with long, dark hair cascading down her shoulders. She appeared to be sleeping peacefully, but something about her made James uneasy. Her features were delicate, almost too perfect. The room itself seemed to change the moment he entered, darker, more oppressive, as if the very air had shifted. He stepped forward cautiously, but before he could say anything, the woman's eyes snapped open, locking onto his. Her eyes were an unsettling shade of red, glowing faintly in the dim light of the room. "You're here," she said, her voice soft, but there was an edge to it, something sharp beneath the sweetness. James froze. "What? Who are you?" The woman smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "I'm here for you. I've waited for you." James took a step back, his heart racing. The words didn't make sense. How could this stranger know him? And why did she seem so familiar? His mind was spinning, trying to make sense of everything. But all he could think was how much he wanted to leave. Something wasn't right about this place, about her. But before he could turn and run, the woman sat up in the bed, her movements unnaturally fast, too graceful to be human. "You don't understand yet," she said, her voice now low and dangerous. "But you will. This house, it's mine. And now, you're mine too." The room seemed to close in around him. He could feel her presence, as if it was seeping into his very skin, filling his thoughts. He took another step back, his breath catching in his throat. This was no ordinary woman. And this was no ordinary mansion. James had inherited more than just a house. He had inherited something far darker, far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. And for the first time, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake coming here. The truth unfolds. James' heart pounded in his chest as the woman in the bed slowly stood up, her feet gliding across the floor as if she were floating. Her eyes, still glowing red, followed his every movement. Her beauty was almost otherworldly, but it was the way she moved, graceful and predatory, that made his stomach twist. "Don't be afraid," she said, her voice calm, almost soothing, but there was a darkness to it that sent a shiver down James' spine. "I'm not going to hurt you, at least, not yet." James could barely catch his breath. His mind screamed at him to run, but his body refused to obey. He was frozen, trapped by her gaze. The room around him seemed to grow colder, the shadows stretching toward him like arms waiting to pull him into their depths. What are you?" James finally managed to whisper, his voice trembling. The woman smiled, her teeth sharp, more like the fangs of a predator than human teeth. She took a slow step toward him, her movements hypnotic. "I am a succubus, and you are the one I've been waiting for." James blinked, trying to make sense of her words. A succubus? That couldn't be real. This was some kind of sick joke, or he was dreaming. There was no way a creature like this could exist outside of myth. But her eyes, those glowing red eyes, told him otherwise. The intensity in them was like nothing he'd ever experienced. You've been waiting for me," James stammered, backing away as she advanced. His legs felt like lead, but he refused to show fear. "I don't even know who you are. I've never seen you before in my life." The succubus's smile widened, though it didn't reach her eyes. "You don't remember me yet, but you will. The moment you accepted the inheritance, you accepted me as well. This mansion, this cursed place, was built for our union, and now it is ours. Your bloodline and mine." James shook his head, disbelief and terror warring within him. "What do you want from me?" Her gaze darkened. "I need your soul, but not in the way you think. You're not just an heir to this house. You're the key to breaking my chains. The moment you stepped inside this mansion, you became bound to me, bound to this place, bound to a curse that has haunted my family for centuries. And now your bloodline must finish what it started." James felt a wave of nausea wash over him. "Curse? What are you talking about? This place, this house was just a mansion. My uncle, he left me this house because—" "The mansion was never just a house," the succubus interrupted, her voice low and dangerous. "It was a prison built to contain me. For centuries, the Wainwrights have kept me locked away here, feeding off my power, profiting from my misery. Your uncle, Arthur, he tried to break the curse, but he failed. And now, the responsibility falls to you." James took a step back, his mind reeling. "But I don't want anything to do with this. I don't even know you. Why me?" "Because," the succubus said, her smile fading into something darker, "you are my blood, just as much as I am yours. Your ancestor struck a deal with my kind long ago. Your line, Your family has always been tied to me. And now, you must decide. Will you continue the pact and claim your rightful place by my side? Or will you leave this place and doom us both to suffer for eternity? James' head spun. He wanted to shout, to refuse, but something inside him, the air, the walls, the very house, seemed to push him toward her. It was as if the mansion itself was alive, pulling him deeper into the web she had spun around him. The succubus stepped closer, her hand reaching out. I don't want to hurt you, James, but this is your destiny. You cannot escape it. You belong here now. I've waited too long, and I will not let you go. James felt his heart racing faster, a mix of fear and confusion built.